in focused conversations. The ABRF annual meeting is just around the corner in Pittsburgh at the end of March. We're excited to offer 3 pre-meeting workshops. Space is still available for these. So if any of these match your interests, please scan the QR code or go to the website to register. We also have continuing a new format that we introduced at last year's meeting, a mini workshop, which is an extended, sort of a double length of our traditional workshops, designed to be quite hands-on and interactive. So space is limited. There's a small additional fee, but you'll be able to exercise and work through tools and activities on each of these areas. In fact, 2 of the sessions, the 2 on the left, business intelligence and marketing, are actually at capacity. So there'll be a waiting list, but if you're interested in any of these, please go to the website as soon as possible to sign up for these these mini workshops. Scholarship opportunities, we've extended the deadline. So if you or one of your colleagues is interested in applying for an Outstanding Scientist Scholarship or the Founders Award, which is specifically intended for support personnel in research facilities, please, again, follow that QR code and you get more information. Those are going to be available through February 15th. All right, with that, again, apologies for the sharing difficulties, but now I'll turn it over to Susanna to introduce our presenters. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. And again, thank you for coming to our ABRF Town Hall for Core Credits for Startup Packages. I'm Susanna Perkins, Executive Director for Research Facilities at the Worcester Polytechnic Institute. And I'd like to right now pass the baton to my co-moderator, Sridhar, for his intro.
Thank you, Susanna. I'm Sridhar Chittor. I direct the Center for Functional Genomics at University of Albany, State University of New York, where it's always sunny. Thank you for coming to this town hall. And I'll be put your questions in the chat. I will be monitoring the chat and asking the questions for you. That way we can consolidate questions that are similar and maximize on our time. I believe we have about 150 or so registrants today, so I don't want to lose time switching from people to people. I also want to say that the plan is to continue these discussions at ABRF in Pittsburgh, where we will probably have more of a roundtable-like discussion where surveys and that will be moderated at each table. The goal is that all that is information will be consolidated and put into a paper in JBT after the meeting. So with that, I will pass it on to Mary.
Actually, Sridhar, just 1 minute. I just wanted to go over appreciation for all the interest in the original listserv that actually prompted this town hall. And as part of the responses in the listserv, 4 institutions really came forward saying that they've actually put in place either a process or a piece of this process to address the needs that everyone was talking about in the listserv. So that's where we got our 4 speakers from, and we so appreciate them taking the time and putting together their slides. So the format for today is going to be to go over with the 4 institutions their findings, what they have in place. And again, as Sridhar and Ken said, please put questions in the chat. So I'm owner of the slide deck, so I'll be advancing the slides, and we'll start by introducing the institution, and then the presenters can introduce themselves and their function. So we're going to start with RPI, and let me share my screen. Are we good here?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, so I am Mary Mar Lopez. I am the Director of Research Course at RPI. And for those of you that don't know much about RPI, we are the oldest polytechnic institute in the country. In 2004, we added the Center for Biotechnology and Interdisciplinary Studies, or CBIS. That's where I am every single day and where the life sciences core facilities are. In 2024, we got a quantum system 1. It was a big deal. This is a collaboration with IBM. And we also have something very unique and totally unexpected in Troy, which is the Experimental Media and Performing Arts Center, or MPAC, which has one of the best concert halls in the country. So that is to give you a little bit of a background. And Susana, if you advance to the next slide, we are going to start talking about the core facility credits. So we do that not only with startup packages, but we have done it with certain pieces of equipment that were obtained through research grants, and the PI decided to put the equipment in the course. So we have in place different models. The biggest one is, okay, we all want to get those new pieces of equipment from the startup and put it in the core. But this is a very difficult negotiation, right? Because the PI always comes back saying, and what do you give me in return? So one of the things that I am very upfront with is this is not a one-to-one transaction. So if the equipment is 100K, we cannot give 100K worth of core credits. So we take into account the service contract, the amount of time that the core director or manager spends maintaining the piece of equipment, and all the things that you all know about keeping the equipment functional and great condition. And then we reach an agreement with the PI. So usually those credits are spread among several years. We don't give everything at once. Our budgets do not allow for that. And something that is extremely important is that the credits that we allocate each year is either you use it or you lose it. They go with the fiscal year. So that is something that we make sure the PI understands. Next, please. There are instances in which we give core credits, but there is nothing in return from the PI. And these are usually, of course, much smaller amounts. And again, we also spread it among several years, usually shorter periods than the Model 1, but still. And again, the same policy applies, that they cannot be carried forward. So where are these funds or these credits coming from? We are kind of fortunate that I have some discretionary funds that I manage, and I get in conversations with the PIs. This is usually much easier when we are talking at the level of assistant professor. Okay, we are hiring assistant professors. The conversations are easier. The amount of money usually are lower, but as you move higher up into the ranks, things get more complicated, and then you may need more collaboration with the departments, the VPR office, the provost, or all together, depending what kind of amount of money you are talking about. Next, please. So I wanted to give you some examples of each category so that you have an idea of what we are talking about. For example, a piece of equipment that was obtained through a research grant. The cost was $44K. The PI was happy to put it in the genomics core, and we provided $4,000 per year for 4 years. I have to say that in this particular case, the PI did not use much of the credits that we allocated, and the PI was happy, we were happy. Another example is when we had a flow cytometer purchased through a startup package, and the PI was willing to put it in the flow cytometry core. Then we provided initially $5K per year for 3 years, plus $10K per year for 2 years, a total of $35K in 5 years. And another example that is also, this last one is really very, very common in the sense that we recommend the assistant professors to request, as part of their startup packages, request funds for core fees. This costs us nothing, and we can count on that money coming to our course. So from these few examples, you can see that there is not a standard formula, depending what we are considering, depending the level of the hire that we are considering, and so on and so forth. So that's all I have for you right now.
Thanks, Miramar. Our next institution is Albert Einstein College of Medicine. Brian?
Hi, everyone. Getting over a cold here, so apologies if I have to stop and cough a bit. So I'm Associate Dean for Research Operations and Infrastructure at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. I've been at Einstein for about 11 years now. I oversee our core facilities, our biotech incubator program, and all of our research space here at the college. Just a little background on Einstein. We're a research-intensive medical school located in the Bronx, New York. We had around 273 million of research funding in 2024, probably a couple 10 million less in 2025, thanks to the whole mess at NIH. And we have a pretty sizable portfolio of core facilities here, over 40 of them, some very heavily subsidized by the institution, broadly used, others that are much smaller and primarily grant funded, and that's really a product of all of the centers that we have here at the college as well. Next slide. So I have just one slide, but I wanted to kind of go over some key points of, it's a mix of what I think you need and what we do here at Einstein. So the program that we have has been in place the entire time I've been here. And one thing I can tell you that makes it work is having leadership buy-in and support, right? So if you're looking to start something like this, you definitely will benefit from having the leadership on board, because if it's coming, if the instructions are coming from the very start of the recruitment process, that our expectation is high-end instrumentation is going to go into our core facilities and we're going to find a way to make it work, then that's likely going to be the outcome of the recruitment process. So here at Einstein, we're a standalone college. We're not part of a larger university system. The dean sets all the recruitment targets and the budgets for the recruitments. And then those are, those happen throughout the year, or they don't, right? Oftentimes the right candidate doesn't appear. But I'm involved in the process pretty frequently because of my role with space. So I meet with a lot of recruits who need wet labs, so we can talk about renovations and whatever it may be. But it's also an opportunity for me then to talk with them about our core facilities, and as I learn about their equipment needs, if there's an item that is a candidate to go into the core, then I'll kind of just reinforce the benefits of this approach that we use, which is, saving the PI from dealing with the service contract expense, the maintenance costs, the operational headaches of having what can sometimes be a sensitive and difficult piece of instrumentation in their lab. It's better for it to be handled by the core facility with somebody who becomes an expert at operating that device. Sometimes for a new recruit, they may not care so much about the service contract savings up front because it would be in their startup package, but it's really explaining to them the downstream benefits when they start getting grants and don't have to worry about budgeting for that piece to keep that piece of equipment running. I also, since we've had a pretty long-standing success with this approach, introduce them to other PIs who have had equipment go into the core, so they can also see that it does work. It's not just me making a sales pitch to them. So we've had a number of PIs who have come into Einstein over my time here. I listed some examples. I'll just go through a few briefly. So we recruited a zebrafish researcher who needed access to a spinning discount focal. We convinced her to put that into our imaging core. She makes heavy use of it, but we're also able to then have that excess time go to our investigators. This device became extremely popular at Einstein, and so much so that we had to buy a second one just to meet the demand. So that was a huge success. In our flow core, we had a retention case where an investigator was leaving, was going to get access to an analyzer at a new institution. So we needed to match that as part of keeping him here. But he was convinced to put it into the core facility again, making the same pitches of the benefits of not dealing with it in his lab, but also ensuring that he'll have, priority access so his lab can do the work that they need. And then the other two examples I list here are chemical synthesis core and immune monitoring. These are cores that didn't exist at Einstein until the Recruit came to us. So the package to basically create these cores came through the startup, and all of the equipment was purchased at once and made available to the entire research community, as opposed to just standing up a very heavy equipment-based lab for an individual researcher. So, the other thing that I think is really important is the incentives, which, has already been mentioned, right? You have to give something to the investigator, especially, it actually doesn't matter, junior or a senior investigator. If the equipment is essential to their program, they want to ensure that they'll get access to it when they need it and can be successful at going out and getting grants. So we do a couple things. Our core credit is just dollars in the startup package. So we don't use vouchers or anything like that. It's just dollars allocated. And it's not necessarily a set formula, but it generally evolves through negotiations with the recruit and determining kind of a rough idea of how much usage they expect in a given year. And sometimes the dollars are finite for the duration of the package, if it's 5 years or whatever. Others, there may be language in the letters, the recruitment letters or retention letters, that allow for a refresh of the funding after a review of their progress towards getting additional grant funding or whatever it may be. The other thing we do is priority access, as I mentioned earlier. I think it's very important to have that. So, in our case, if it's a device you're scheduling on a calendar, it's opened for that lab a week in advance or whatever it is, so they can get on the schedule, and then it opens up for the rest of the institution to schedule. If it's some service-based thing, then, generally we're working out those details with the core director to make sure that they can adjust their schedule as needed to accommodate the investigator. The other thing that I think is helpful is, trying to standardize as much as possible. So I wouldn't call our approach a policy. It's just a way that we do things here. It's not in writing that this equipment has to go into cores, but it does. And one way that we further kind of structured this is through our request to recruit process, which I put into place a few years ago here. In the past, we had maybe, a little less structured approach for recruitments, but now every chair or center director is required to submit a budget in advance before any letter is drafted, outlining the lab needs, whether that's, staff, supplies, and equipment. We get the full equipment list, and we're able to identify right there if there's candidates for equipment that could go in a core, and start having that conversation with the person doing the recruitment to make sure we're all on the same page. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Brian. Our next institution is Purdue.
Hi, everybody. My name is Natasha Nicolaitis. I'm the Associate Director of Operations at the Bindley Bioscience Center at Purdue. We house and manage most of the life science core facilities, but not all of them at Purdue. Purdue is pretty decentralized, and we don't have a formal system in place for doing this kind of thing. But we have had success doing it on an individualized basis. And I will say this starts with communication and keeping tabs on what is out there. And that really is all about building relationships. It has happened many, many times that instrumentation lands on campus in somebody's startup and we don't know anything about it. In one absolutely famous incident, a faculty member got a really high-end new microscope. And the first time we learned about it, was when she came to our imaging core director to ask for his help training her students on it. That did not go real well. But in other cases, we've had success actually kind of catching this on the front end. I do give tours to almost every life science faculty member or potential faculty member that comes to the university. We've had a lot of success with departments, at least showing potential candidates the core facilities. And I've at least found that with the current crop of the current generation of younger faculty, they're much more aware of what core facilities do and much more likely to just ask for money for stuff that's already in the core than want their own things. It's not always true, but sometimes it is. Okay, next slide. So I want to just briefly talk about two highlights of times that we've done this in fairly different situations. The first one is the one that I would prefer and that I am pushing for. In this case, the instrument was specifically bought and placed in the core facility as part of a PI startup package. This was in the imaging core. It was a new confocal microscope. The head of the department came to us and said, "Hey, I've got a new PI. He wants this scope. Can we talk?" That was a little stroke of luck because this department head was heavily involved with our core facilities. He sits on an advisory committee for one of our cores, so is very in tune with that kind of thing. And as it turned out, the imaging core really kind of needed a new scope anyway, and we managed to get 9 academic departments to pitch in on this scope. So it was really handy. It was very useful, and we knew it was going to be useful to the wider research community. In that case, the PI received funds from us, just as Brian said, just dollars directly into his startup that he could use for this instrument. And for the sake of simplicity, we said that he could use it for any instrument in the core, like not trying to track what specific scope he was going to use. And in reality, he was using that scope 99% of the time, and there was a reason that he wanted it. The core director and the PI and I sat down and worked through the configuration for this instrument over the course of weeks, because we needed to make sure that not only was it going to meet his needs, but that everybody else in the community was also going to be able to use it. So we went through weeks and weeks and weeks of discussions to make sure that we had all the I's dotted and the T's crossed and it was going to work for everybody. That instrument is now our most heavily used instrument in the core. Not only does the PI use it, but everybody in the plant biology community uses it. It's been great. So that's kind of where I would like to go. However, it often happens that instruments land on campus and we know nothing about it. And then we have to have a one-on-one conversation with the PI. Our genomics core was also in need of a new instrument, and it turned out that a PI had recently come onto campus and bought a new sequencer. So we had a discussion with him, and he was very amenable to placing it in the core facility. So we actually set up an MOU. And these always get a little trickier because he did not want to pay core fees. So what we said was, okay, the PI's lab can essentially own this instrument half the time. You get half the time on this instrument, and the core will completely step out. But that means he's buying his own supplies, he's buying his own reagents. The instrument's under a 5-year service contract, so that is not an issue right now. But you do have to work out what happens if it breaks. Who is then, responsible for things? Like I said, right now it's under a 5-year contract, so the company's responsible. But those are things to consider. How does the time split work out? How does the cost for repair or PMs work out if you do this? And then it really needs to be time limited, because in this core, for instance, after 5 years, now we have a service contract to discuss, which didn't come up in the original MOU, but it will. Then we can also renegotiate guaranteed time. Like I said, right now it's 50-50, and the PI right now is using it maybe 20% of the time. So it's a real big win for the core. Like I said, the deal is though that the core doesn't help at all. Like if he wants the core staff's time, he has to pay for it. So I don't love. We're actually doing this again with a new startup core, a new lipid nanoparticle core that we just launched. It's definitely more complicated and less ideal, but it is a way to get instrumentation into the core. And I mean, so far so good. So that's all I've got.
Thank you, Natasha. And last, Montana State University.
One other thing. This
Oh, go right ahead.
implementation. I think there needs to be a discussion. We had a PI wanting to put something in the flow core, and we said no, thank you. It was just the instrument was not a good core instrument. So I think there should not be any pressure on the core to accept any instrument because some just don't work.
Totally agree. Okay, on to Montana State.
Thanks,
Mary?
Susanna. I feel like a lot of what I'm going to say is probably reiterating what the previous speaker has already said, but
Absolutely fine.
the start, well, actually, first I just want to give a shout out that we won the FCS National Championship in January. I just need to put that out there. Go Cats. So I am the Red Service Centers Director for Montana State University. That means I oversee all of the core facilities in our centralized program that is overseen by the VPR's office. We currently have 12 core facilities, and we centralized our program in 2021. A lot of what I am going to say has to do with this centralized program, and often people are like, how did you get the centralization buy-in? This happened before I started in this position, so from what I have heard and talking to colleagues that have been around since 2021, the buy-in to centralize our core facilities came from having assistance with compliance with rate setting and agreements with external clients, funding support from the VPR office directly to the core facilities, providing regular financial support, and then FTE resources. So my position and our fiscal manager that helps with the rate setting across all the core facilities to keep it consistent. So I just want to put that out there. That's how we did it at MSU. We are a smaller operation, and it seems like a lot of universities are interested in trying to get more of a centralized structure so that they can do some of these processes like this, core startup and tracking instrumentation that I'm going to talk about. Next slide. So last year with everything going on, we really wanted to become more aware of what instrumentation was on campus and what new PIs especially were requesting in startup packages to make sure we weren't duplicating resources that we already have, just to be more efficient with less IDCs or anticipating less IDC dollars. With our centralized structure, even if the VPR office allocates IDCs to a college or department, the approvals to use those IDCs in a startup still have to get funneled back up to her. And at that point, I'm looped in to review anything regarding instrumentation requests to see if we already have it on campus. We are working on creating a campus-wide equipment catalog as well that will house in PPMS, StrataCore PPMS, just to make sure that we are tracking instrumentation and trying to avoid duplication. At the bare minimum, we're hoping that this at least can trigger a conversation with a PI. So we just had, for an example, a new faculty in animal range sciences trying to acquire a mass spec. They were already had in the mass spec core. And even if they still need this instrumentation in their facility, we at least want to have a conversation with them to make sure they understand, are you aware that we already have this in a core facility? Are you aware of the benefits of using the core resources, the service contract to get the expertise of the core manager and core staff, standardized protocols for that equipment, regular maintenance, we're paying the service contract for you, things like that. And are you aware of the financial responsibility of this equipment down the road? I was looking at the comments and people were asking about this of, are you telling PIs that you're responsible for this if you don't put it in the core in 5 years when the instrument breaks and you don't have a service contract anymore? So at least having that conversation with the PIs to make them understand the benefits of using the core facility. What we ended up doing with this specific use case was give this faculty $25,000 to use in the mass spec core with similar criteria where it gets allocated to an index that our fiscal manager is overseeing, and they get to use a certain amount of that money each year for 5 years, and as a user lose it at the end of each fiscal year. I did see questions in the chat about whether, the instrumentation doesn't end up working for them and how do we navigate that. This is still also new for Montana State, so we haven't navigated that just yet. And then we do have another example where a PI wrote a grant and put a piece of equipment in our material analysis facility, and they are receiving some core credit to use for helping to get that successful grant and put that equipment in there. So those are our two kind of use cases. It's still a very new process for us, but we're hoping that it continues to evolve. And like Natasha said, communication, I think, is key with the faculty. And we do meet with them at the new faculty orientation as well, just to introduce the concept of the core facilities and that we are, aware of these things and trying to track them, and that we want to work with them and make sure that they're getting what they need. If they're going to be using that instrument 24/7 and it's, critical to their research, then, it makes more sense for that instrument to go into their lab versus having it in the core. So yeah, I think it comes down to communication for us.
Thank you, Mary. And that
Hey, Chad,
ends.
I'm gonna ask a
um,
question to start this whole conversation. Anya's had asked about, can somebody define the difference between a core credit versus a core voucher? And I'll tie that into the next question, which would be how, when you start making these kind of credits, do the departments pay into it? Where do those funds come from? And who's involved in these discussions? Is the core involved? So sort of three questions rolled into one. Who wants
So
to go
I'll
first?
I'll talk about ours a little bit. I mean, what I call a core credit is really just funny money, right? It's college dollars stuck into an account, whether it's an Einstein, a recruitment account for the recruits, or a research support account for somebody who's being retained. Or research support accounts can also be given to people who, there's a specific need to support their program. So the college creates an account that then gives them access to use that in the core, just like they could with their grant, right? So they spend off of that account, and the core gets full credit for providing that service then. So they're paying the same rate as everybody else, just like the NIH wants us to be doing for applying consistent fees across the board. And the core gets the benefit of having that revenue come in. It's not looked at at least not by my office, not looked at in a different light, right? Our finance people will get into the weeds on the sources of revenue in a core when we're having bigger budget discussions, but from a day-to-day basis, the core gets full credit. And I think it's important, right? Because it shows there's value in that facility having that spend coming through from these different sources of revenue.
Also a different viewpoint.
I was going to say, for us, it's more or less the same as what Brian just outlined. In the one case where we gave PI money, it came out of our own discretionary budget. The center actually funded it, but we have had many times where the college will just fund the credits as just dollars in their startup account, and then it comes from the college. And it is much easier for the core that way, because then the PI has their account and they pay for the core's use just the way they normally would out of their startup account. And then I don't have to worry about tracking anything. It's standard core operations.
So for us, we have also both situations, and I agree with you, Natasha, that when it is part of the startup, it's easier for us because when it comes from our discretionary funds, I have to monitor for each PI how much they are spending. So it's really tedious, even though it goes to the course and we love that part, but somebody has to track it. And because those funds come from my budget, I have to track it. And it's tedious, but still we do it.
Now, of these different variations in which you're giving these credits or usage priorities, what has worked more in your institution, and where have you had challenges? Which models work better?
I think it depends what you need, and it depends what is presented in front of you at any particular time. For us, all three can work. The challenge, I think, comes when the PI doesn't like how many credits you are giving him or her for this person to put the piece of equipment in the core. I think that's where the friction can happen. We have been successful. We have reached agreements all the time, and it has worked for both parties. But I would not say that one model is better than others.
Everybody agree, or anybody has a different viewpoint?
I mean, we're not. I guess we don't really set them up that way so much. Like it's if there was a non centrally authorized account like the recruitment or research support accounts like I'm talking about, it's probably dollars that were first allocated to a center director or a chair that they can then dole out to their faculty, right? So they handle all those details from the course perspective. They're not involved in that conversation. They're just there to provide the service, and having our finance group setting up the accounts so they're in the name of the PI, they automatically associate with the PI's lab and iLab, allows it to just be a normally used fund like anything else, and keeps the operations moving nice and smoothly from the core side of things. They're not doing anything outside of the norm.
Now, we talked about instrumentation being funded or placed, right? Are any universities doing things like where you're paying for the staff, course support staff salaries, or if it's a centralized resource where you could sort of hire out individuals to support that particular method, spatial, let's say. So here's somebody from the core whose salary will be supported by this, and then we buy the instrument or something. Another type of model.
So we've done this recently with a recruit that needed access to a notobiotic facility. And so we had one that we were basically keeping up, but no one was really using it. And so really to align the expense of having a dedicated animal caretaker assigned to that space, right? Because you need somebody who's expertly trained to be going into here and not killing all the mice. So we allocated that expense to this person's startup package so the core, the Animal Institute in our case, did not absorb that FTE cost for that support. And then, you have to be careful too, because the investigator may think, well, this person reports to me now. It's not the case, right? Especially in our situation. This is a union environment. There's a lot of structure here in how we have to manage things. So we have to be clear, it's kind of a dotted line situation. Obviously, the PI has a lot of expertise with notobiotic work, so we want them involved in training and working with the technician, but ultimately the management still falls to the core. And I think if you go this route, you have to be very clear about setting that, because otherwise you're setting yourself up for some future problems, I think.
I mean, and I think Joe also asked a question about, is there support for, somebody asked a question about for like data analysis and bioinformatics. And I think it is something you have to think about. If it's just an instrument that slots into an existing pipeline, that's straightforward. But I mean, you really do have to think about the whole data pipeline from beginning to end. And if the core can support that, if it is novel with a new piece of instrumentation, and then sort out how all that's going to change. So it really is not just the instrument. I mean, if it's a new scope in a facility, that might be great, but sometimes it's not.
One of the items that we ran into with startup conversations with, putting something in place is a time frame, because by the time that the institution has identified somebody that they want a quick turnaround. So can anyone comment, the few initial conversations I've had is we really don't have time to put together a package like this. So can anyone comment on what type of pre-work you may have done to get ready to be able to put something in place right off the bat?
I think what is important is to meet with the candidate from the very beginning. So we do the same thing as Natasha. I give tours to all candidates. I show them the core facilities, and I sit with them and ask what their needs will be. We also send them a survey, because these people, if they want to come to the biotech center, they have to fill out a form or a survey in which they spell out their needs, and that includes the core facilities. The moment we see something that they need that we don't have, and if the candidate goes to the next level, then, or the next step, then we definitely sit down and so on and so forth. So by the time they get hired, we have a pretty clear idea of what they need and how we could go about it. And then we can tell them if the offer is out there and they get their offer letter, then we sit down with them to make sure they are aware of which conditions or what can be done to accommodate their needs. So it is done from the very beginning, all along the process, and we have been successful in that sense.
I mean, we talk about startup packages, right? So it's a new PI coming in. Do you use these methodologies even in retention packages? And also a corollary to that is, let's say I got somebody, they're successful, blah, blah, blah. They get a couple of grants and then they get hired by institution next door or next state or whatever. And this instrument is not going to go with them, right? And you're getting a new person in. That instrument now may not be necessarily useful to the rest of them as much as it was for the PI who's exiting. So how do you deal with those situations?
So I will start with saying we have done this. We've had conversations about startup or about retention packages. The most recent one we had, we actually decided that the instrument that the PI was asking for was actually not the best fit for a core facility. She needed it for RNA-based stuff. It was essentially an RNA-based mass spec, and it was just not a great fit. And the user base was going to be tiny, which is one way we would kind of take a look at any core instrument, right? Is anybody going to use it except one or two PIs? So in that case, we said no, thank you. But we absolutely would consider it in the case of a retention package.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned we do. We've done it multiple times with the retentions to put stuff into the cores, and again, use the same approach, priority access and credits to use it. I can't think of a case where a PI has left with, a piece of equipment that wasn't used afterwards, but if it was the case, I mean, it's something we can monitor, right? So through iLab, we know how much usage is on a particular device just from the tracking, and we know what our service contract costs are, right? Or our maintenance costs. So we can make a determination at some point, does it make sense for us to even keep this device? And I've sold stuff on secondary, right? Just to get rid of equipment that we're not using anymore and then use it for some other need in the core.
And I think if you're careful about what you say yes to, right? If you talk to the user community and realize, yeah, this is going to be a broad-based need, then you're not relying so much on one PI. And if you're relying it so much on one PI, then maybe it wasn't the greatest instrument to put in the core in the first place. But things go up and down, right? Things change. I mean, like Ryan said, we're always looking at, okay, this instrument's kind of getting old and maybe the user community has dropped off and maybe we don't need it anymore. And I don't think that's any different.
And the age of the instrumentation is another wishy-washy thing, especially in these days of genomics, where instruments and technology are changing at the drop of a hat. So what's hot and cool today, 2 years from now, is not.
Yeah, that's unfortunately the game we're in, right? So that's why you need donors and other sources of fund to keep funding these investments in cores. It costs quite a lot of money.
To that point, do many of you or any of you lease equipment as opposed to purchasing it because of this technology advancing so quickly and giving you more, being more nimble to pivot if, as you say, the users drop off, or you can end it after a 4-year lease or something, or continue it, or move to the next model.
We haven't really here. I mean, we do lease, but on the operating lease side, right? So we can be compliant with
Mhm.
SIG applications. So if we
Yeah.
need a piece of equipment, we're doing it that way. And unfortunately, been stuck with some after the SIGs didn't get funded. But I've only done a few capital leases for equipment, and it really, a lot of times it's the administration making a decision that the interest payments aren't worth it, like because we think the usage is enough there. So you have to make a calculation up front. I think it's a reasonable strategy to use. It's just not one that I've really seen our finance people get behind here.
We've done it, but in general, unless it is an incredibly high use instrument, you are not going to recover those lease costs. That's been our experience, and realistically, I mean, unless it's like genomics where the turnaround time is super fast, the university really prefers to just buy outright and then hang on to it until it's a dinosaur and it dies.
Yeah, we've had the same experience as you, Natasha. We did several calculations to lease some mass spec, and that was not affordable at all. And and then the university decided to buy a Maldi for us because it was cheaper.
Yep,
Much cheaper.
that was our experience as well. I mean, the only kind of silver lining to that, it was an Agilent mass spec, and at the end of the lease period, Agilent said, "You know what? We don't want it back. Why don't you just keep it?" Okay, so that, I mean, essentially, we ended up, leasing to own, and that worked out. But it's not something that I would preferably do.
So ideally, you want the core to be involved right up front, right, when these discussions are going, so that the core staff with more expertise in that particular field can make sure that the instrument you're getting is the best capabilities, or you're given a quote for XYZ, but you actually need B and D as well, which is not included in the quote, and you want it all as one big piece. So everything, especially if you're buying a P2 Solo, for example, the computer prices were not included. And so you would buy the instrument and then, I need a new computer. That's $8,000 more, $10,000 more after the fact. So you want the cores to be involved up front, but does it always happen? Probably not. As I think Joe or somebody had mentioned in the chat that, the PI is writing an MRI grant or a SIG grant, and it's like it's due next week, and boom, 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 we need to, that's when you get involved. And you haven't had the time to do the due diligence and make sure that is the best fit for that institution or those researchers. And you end up with an instrument anyways at the end of the day. What do you do with that? In terms of service contracts and everything downstream, you got the instrument, but now you got to feed the elephant.
One of the things that I think most speakers touched on was finding out if whatever is requested is somewhere else within their institution. So they talked about double checking through capital. And I know one little plug for ABRF, there is a session on capital tracking, because I know that a lot of us struggle with finding out not just what is in our cores, but what's beyond the walls of our cores with all the labs. So that we're not buying something that is in a lab that is partially used. So does anyone have a comment on what system that you are using right now to, cross beyond the service centers to see if that exists?
So
We use the Novolo system for inventory tracking.
Yeah, I will comment. So since I manage our space, I actually have access to that system, which is we use a system here called FM Systems, which they were just bought by some other company. I think it's called Open Blue now. Tracks all of our square footage on campus, PI assignments to space, et cetera, et cetera. But it's also our asset database. So it has all of the equipment, all of the tagged equipment with source of funding and who it's tagged to. It's kind of a mess. I inherited it not that long ago, and it's just unfortunately don't have the bandwidth to get to it right now, nor the staff to really work on it. But I see the potential for a system like this if you can have the asset component opened up to the rest of the institution, so you're not developing your own database, but you're using a system like this, which can be made available to people to see certain sections of it. you could tag all this equipment to the lab and then it can be searchable. So you could actually find this stuff, right? So I personally use it when people ask me questions like, do we have this device at Einstein? I'll go look in the database, be able to tell them. It'd be better if they could do it themselves. But that's a staffing challenge right now.
So
Yeah.
Stratacore's, sorry, Natasha. Stratacore's has a new feature called their catalog feature, where it's an outward facing, basically list of equipment, and it can be more than just what's in the core facilities. So we're working to put together a shared equipment list across campus, even outside of the core facilities. We're still trying to figure out what equipment do we want to list on there, because we don't want old dinosaur equipment that's not functioning. And it's not going to be all the assets. Our asset program is also a bit of a mess, and I'm also inheriting it a little bit. So I feel you, Brian. But we are excited to use this catalog feature, so that way PIs can see what might be in the engineering college and the plant sciences department. And working with those PIs to make sure they're okay with sharing that equipment, and maybe putting some regulations or rules in place of who can use it and when and all that. So we are excited to get that running this year.
So I have to actually go ask our property asset people, and I try to keep an updated sheet. I will sometimes literally ask them, give me every asset that's over $10,000 on campus, like every few years, and then I can search it, because I don't have the authority to go into the main asset database. But I can see everything that's on campus that way. One of the challenges that we face is because the property accounting people enter things into the database manually based on POs and quotes. You get some really interesting line items. It's still sometimes really hard to find things. And I don't know how to make it better, because I don't necessarily expect them to know that this is a mass spec and that's an LC and all of this goes together and is really one thing. And I don't really have an answer for that. I mean, I know, so I can find things sometimes. And sometimes somebody will just ask me, does somebody have this? And I know the core doesn't have it, but sometimes I'll just go look and say, oh, hey, so-and-so's lab has this, and you just want to go talk to them.
Again, when you don't know what the PI down the hall has purchased, you sometimes end up with these situations of a competing core where the PI student now says, oh, no, his friends in the other lab, hey, just come and use our instrument. And next thing you know, it's free here. I think the core is going to charge for services, but you end up with a competing core that is necessarily not as well trained. They may come talk to you for all the guidance about the experiment, but eventually it just happens down the hall, and forget about GeneVis or somebody else outside the university. How do you deal with that, and what kind of strategies do you have in that documentation or agreement that you have up front to prevent this?
So this is a problem, right? I mean, even for us with a pretty good structure for onboarding new equipment, if a PI gets funds to buy a high-end piece of equipment, they probably can do it, right? If it's off their grant funding, they control it. We have a loose policy on this of the PI and his or her collaborators can use it, right? So there has to be some evidence that these people are working together. And if we start to catch wind that it's expanding beyond that, then we have to intervene. So we have to have a meeting with that individual and discuss why it's problematic, right? And it is, right? Because if the core starts seeing a lot of usage siphoned off, then that puts the core staff at risk, that instrument at risk for the rest of the institution if we're not able to have a steady stream of income showing that it's valuable for the research community. So it's not an easy problem for sure to solve. But I think having a little bit of policing helps, knowing that somebody's watching. It's usually the core director that will alert me to that problem if it comes up, right? Because they're going to be the first one to notice.
The vendors tell everyone everything. That's how ours.
Sometimes.
Did you know that this is being installed right 2 doors
not
down
always.
from you?
So we're very nearing the 2:00 hour. Are there any burning questions before we actually end the town hall? Any final
Any questions
comments?
that we didn't ask from the chat?
I have a question. This has come up many times when we've talked about this at UNC about doing core credits and not adding the piece of equipment into their startup. But we're getting pushback saying, well, then we're not competitive enough. Then when we look at ourselves compared to Vanderbilt or whoever else, we look like we're not giving them as much because they're letting them buy all these things for their lab. So how are you responding to that?
We put it in the startup. That's the way to do it. So it's there, it's expensed against it, and it's delivered to the core. So it works. It hits that issue.
Because the money is still expensed against the startup. It just doesn't live in the PI's lab.
I
The
think the
same.
more institutions that adopt something, the more it will become the norm. So one other thing, we are hopefully going to be doing a session on this with roundtables in Pittsburgh. So we welcome all of you to join us. Table topics kind of set up because there's certainly an awful lot of interest and a lot of different ideas that we'd love to hear more from. The hour was kind of tight. So please join us in Pittsburgh. And there is also that session on capital tracking. Sridhar, did you have anything else to add?
I was going to say that, if you have other questions that you would like to be discussed at the ABRF, email them to Susanna and me or to Ken, and we'll try to formulate those. So we'll have a more productive discussion there. And I don't know if you guys were there at last year when Nicole had a session with roundtables and there was a survey happening on the spot. And so people were getting feedback as they were discussing things. And then that finally became a paper recently. So we would like to do something similar to that. So there's some hard evidence at the end, that, an output that we can all use.
Very interactive.
So thank you all for supporting and joining us in today's thing. Thank you to the speakers again for sharing your perspectives.
Absolutely. And thank you to Ken for taking over the organization.